Well, I know that we talked. I know the story you're referring to because we've spoken recently, and it's you know it's a tough story because it's personal, but at the same time, I think it's a necessary story to tell because I mean we're all human beings and we all go through things and we all have obstacles, we all have tragedies, we all have stressors, things that we need to overcome. So I know what you want to talk about, or that we want to talk about today, is the loss of my daughter. Um, so I lost my daughter to suicide um, last June, June 6th, and she was 20 years old. And at the time, I was a command chief at Incirlik Air Base in Turkey, and my phone rang at 2:30 in the morning, and it was the seventh there. And I looked at the phone and I saw it was from my wife, and I figured that she had like pocket dialed me and that she wouldn't call me at 2:30 in the morning my time. And then 10 minutes later, the phone rang again, and at I kind of at that point my heart sank before I picked up the phone because I was like, oh, she's purposely calling me at 2:30 in the morning my time, and I know that she got off work at 4:30 her time, so like those times matched up to me. And I picked up the I picked up the phone, and all I could hear on the phone was screaming, and it wasn't my wife, but it was our good friend who lived across the street. She was trying to tell me, and I couldn't understand what she was trying to tell me, but I knew it was bad. And then my wife picked up the phone, or grabbed the phone, and she told me that she had found my daughter and that she was dead. And my my wife, you know, for a parent to find their child, deceased, and she just kept saying she was so cold, she was so cold, she was so cold, which will something that you know I'll hear that my wife say that, and that'll haunt me for the rest of my life. I know that for sure. Um, yes, so it was continuous contact with my wife over the next few hours as my wife dealt with different folks coming into the house to take care of the house, to take care of my daughter, and then to take my daughter out of the house. So after I got that call, um, my son was in security forces tech school at the time, and so I reached out to his wife because I needed to get in contact with him, and I couldn't reach him. And fortunately, I have there's an NCO that worked for me previously who was his tech school flight chief, and I reached out to him, and he drove to, and this was in the evening time in Lackland, and he drove to the base to pull my son aside to talk to him and to tell him in person, and to get him on the phone with me. And you know, as I tell this story, I can tell you that the Air Force is a family, and that in times of people's struggles, there are people that were honestly throughout the world that reached out and did things for me and my family that were that we needed, and that you don't necessarily expect, but people will jump to action to help you. And so, Sergeant Joshua Villa, he was a big part of that, helping my family that night. And so that was one thing I got like after I got that initial call. I was it was important to me to reach out to my son, and then it was important to me to keep in contact with my wife, not because I know that she had to do things and there was a lot going on, but it was important to me for me to continuously, you know, and we probably spoke every 10, 15 minutes, right? Then I waited for the time to get to, for it to get a little bit closer to dawn, and then I reached out to my commander, the wing commander at the time, and I asked to come over to his house to talk to him. And he lived like a block away, so I walked over to his house, and I told him that my daughter had passed and that I was a week away from PCSing, and I said, and obviously I'm like, I got to get out of here, and are you okay with me getting out of here and not coming back? And he was great, and um, yeah, General Eglin was. I could tell he was in shock, right? And we'd become close over the year there, and because after I left General Eglin's house, the next person I called was my first sergeant. It was Master Sergeant Ruan Britz, who's actually the first sergeant for the Air Force Band now. And I told him what happened, and I was like, First Sergeant, I need to get out of here. I need your help. And he jumped into action, right, to work out my travel plans to get me out of there. And I had I had an executive assistant at the time, Sergeant Jordan Holcomb, and he was getting replaced by Sergeant Atwell, and they both helped me do all my out processing over that time. And honestly, I left the base probably 16 hours from when I was notified to do all my out process to get on a flight. It wasn't easy to fly out of Turkey to start flying back to California where my wife was. And but there were a bunch of people that helped. I'll say this: after I wasn't in the greatest mental state, right? So I was walking back from General Eglin's house, and I talked to the first sergeant, and I had like where I got teary-eyed at certain points throughout the night because I talked to my sister and I talked to some other family members to let them know what was happening, and but man, I dropped to my knees in the street and I sobbed after I talked to the first sergeant because I guess once I talked to my boss and then I talked to the first sergeant, I kind of made it real almost, and the rest of it was kind of like I'm trying to help others or trying to like communicate with others, and then it like really hit me, and so after I talked to my boss and then the first sergeant, and I was walking back to my home, I just hit my knees like in the street and I just started to sob, and like it became real, like once I spoke to people in person about it, face to face, then I guess I started to like the weight of it started to hit me, and so I went to my house and I got dressed and I was like going to go to work to start to try the process of trying to get out process to get out instantly, and my boss and the wing commander showed up with the chaplain at my house, maybe a half hour later, and chaplain gave me really good advice, and told me to lean on others, and that it was going to take time, and but I assured him I was okay, and they left, and it was my boss showed up and he had to change a command because there was a group that was changing out that was like 10 minutes later, and it was like all the way on their side of the base, so I was surprised that he showed up, but that's like the caring kind of people that we have and the family vibe that we have in the Air Force. So what I didn't realize is that we build relationships and people care about you, but when you see sympathy in people's eyes for you, that became very hard for me, and that became very quickly for me. So when I walked into the office and I saw people that I developed a close relationship like my exec and Colonel Eglin's exec at the time, and I saw that like they were hurting for me. Oh, like I had to walk into my office and cry some more because, and then throughout the day as people want to show that they cared, right? It became hard for yeah, it just became hard for me, and I couldn't really talk to him, you know, and it made it harder for me. But I didn't really get a chance to say goodbye to people, right? And they were trying to say goodbye and then show me that they cared. And so, but I was trying to move faster and get a lot of stuff done that day, and I was trying to move fast on purpose to run into as few people as I possibly could. But you know, I had and news like that travels pretty quickly, especially if you're a command chief, right? And I mean, that day I had a call from Chief Tony Cruz Munoz, who was the Third Air Force Command Chief, and in just a few seconds' time, he was in tears. I could tell. And to see other people hurting for you, it's tough. Wow, you're making me relive this, which I haven't done it like this. It's almost like therapy. And people truly care about you, right? And so, you know, the rest of that day was just really getting a lot of stuff done so I could leave in PCS that day. And
Would you say having that community around you enabled you to be able to carry out that short mission to getting home at that time?
yeah, and we would do it for any airman, right? It wasn't any airman that was struggling, any airman that was going through like a tragedy like that, we would do that for. So the fact that I was the command chief just meant that instead of it being like my unit, it became like more people from the base, right? But I'm confident in saying that, right? That any airman going through tragedy, that people are going to wrap their arms around and take care of them and reach out to them. Yeah. So I left the base and started the probably 30-hour journey to fly back, right? And so it was a lot of time with my thoughts, right? And as you're moving, I think it's okay because you're moving and that you're staying in motion. And so yeah, those thoughts are in your head, and like there were times of fighting back tears and that stuff. But you know, the really big thought in my mind was, I need to get home to my wife. You know, I needed to put my arms around her, and so I eventually get to California, and I'm met by my wife and my son. You know, and he had just flown in a little bit earlier that day, and we. You know, I got in on a Friday, and we were having our service the next morning at the funeral home, and so it was quick, right? And my wife's family and my family were coming into town, and that time, it felt like 10 hours, I guess, but it was probably 48, I guess, maybe, in the whole process. Yeah, the time changing, and just a lot going on in your mind racing, and it just kept going. And but when you know when I yeah, and family started to come in, and then we you know we go to the funeral home in the morning, and you know, something that you never think you'd do, but you know, I had to go and write out a eulogy for my daughter, and um, then you know, it was a very small service, but you know, sat at a podium with my daughter right next to me, and you know, the the base chaplain, you know, he had really great words, and he was awesome for us. And we had some of our friends from the base were out there and providing us support. But yeah, so I had reached out to his unit and said I was going to attend his tech school graduation, and that and they asked me to be the guest speaker for his tech school graduation, and I agreed, and So that was 10 days after I got back was when his graduation was. So I had, I kept that commitment. And something I didn't realize at the time is, when you go through events in your life and they're impacted by other events, right? So I was talking to you about being at the funeral home and reading the eulogy because I've had some issues with public speaking in the past after I had some post deployment where you get some nervousness. Well, now I have a hard time speaking at a podium. I don't know, because it kind of puts me in that same spot, So I went through when I went down to do my son's tech school graduation and I gave the speech. I didn't stand behind a podium. I wrote the speech out and I memorized it, and so I gave it that way. And I didn't realize that would be a problem for me later on. That I would have it puts me there. Yeah. With the time change and everything, I kind of almost made it home the next day after I kind of found out, but it was probably 2 days later, I guess. Yeah, and so we had the service really quick because my son came on a Friday after school, and then I arrived and we had the service on Saturday because he had to fly back on Sunday, so he didn't get washed back or and he was really close to graduating, and and he made arrangements with his family and stuff. So we kept that timeline so that it wouldn't impact him, and so that's why we kind of moved very quickly with all of that. But the base was great. At Vandenberg, I had PCS a year prior. My wife and my daughter still live there, but people jumped in and were bringing us food every day. They were stopping by and checking on us, and if we needed anything, they jumped through hoops for us. Whether it was the casualty affairs folks from FSS, the chaplain, the wing commander, the command chief, the mission support group leadership. They did very much. They did a lot for us, and then they made sure we were taken care of by everything. Yeah. So less than a month later, after losing my daughter and leaving Incirlik, on July 4th is when I arrived here, and we had to do so much to PCS out of Vandenberg that we stayed very busy, and knowing that we were PCSing, it for me was almost like a mission. Like, we're prepping for this mission to get here, and it was really important for me to be here for Colonel Perez change of command when he took command. For some reason in my mind, I know that I could have said, "Hey, I'm going to be a month later" or whatever, and everybody would have supported me. But for some reason in my mind, it was very important to be here for Colonel Perez change of command. And so, we just kept. It was a very tight timeline. There was a lot going on, and when we so if we lost my daughter on June 6th, I think we drove out on June 30th is when we left California, and we had that one weekend where we went to my son's tech school graduation as well. So it's a pretty quick timeline. And then we drove across the country, right? And then we arrived, and we stayed down in the National Harbor on the 4th, signed into our house on the 5th. When we got here, the community here reached out to us as well. They reached out to us prior to us getting here, and then once we arrived, folks were really great. And after we signed for a house at 11 in the morning, and at noon, Chief Wright was in my house, welcoming us and checking on us. And, you know, all of our neighbors over on Erie Court, the command chiefs, they all stopped by. And then the following night, we had a dinner together. And over the time, I opened up to a lot of them, and they helped us very much, and probably more than they know. And it wasn't always sad, right? But it was just being able to have people like that in your corner is huge. I'd say that like it's continuously in your thoughts, right? And so when I finally got to Andrews, and like it was my mission, right? And like my mindset, and my military mindset was like, oh, your mission is to get to Andrews, and be there for Colonel Pratt's change of command. And so that was on the 10th, and then now on the 11th, like now we're here, and I knew pretty. I know because of I had some post-deployment issues and I've had some anxiety issues from that, and just from job stress where it built up and I didn't get help, and then eventually went to mental health. I knew that this was going to be something that I needed help with, and that I needed some professional help with. So I went over to our mental health clinic, and I started to every 2 weeks I had an appointment over there, and I learned that grief isn't linear, that you don't start at one place and then you just smoothly go through, just get to the end. I learned that something can happen, you can see something, you can have a memory, whatever, and you can, kind of go back and almost start over. And that I also learned that I needed to give myself a break. And what I mean by that is that as I've always had high expectations for myself at work, right? And I've always been driven and motivated, and because I was grieving and I wasn't able to bring the same joy, the same motivation as the 11th Wing Command Chief when I first got here, right? And for a while, I'll say. And when you're already in grief and now you feel like you're failing, and I felt like I was failing. There was a lot of times where I just felt like I was failing as the command chief, and I wasn't living up to my own expectations. And I felt that, and so that I was kind of even falling, into a depression, I would say. And mental health, Dr. Nickel over there, she said, hey, if you had an airman that was going through this, what would your expectations of them be? And, I said, well, I would expect they'd have a hard time, and that, we'd have to be there, and it would be a long time for them to get through it. She's like, well, why is your expectations different for yourself than it would be for someone that worked for you? And when she said that, that allowed me, I guess, almost to give myself a break and say, hey, I wouldn't expect someone else to be at their peak performance for a while, and my wife and I, we struggled, and I struggled at work. I'll be honest, there were times we'd be in a 1 hour meeting, and we'd leave the 1 hour meeting, and I'd be like, man, my mind was somewhere else that whole meeting, and I really don't know what we talked about. I know the subject, but I don't know the details of that. And so, that's a little bit hard when you're the command chief to admit that, to say that. But I'd say my wife and I, we've been married for a long time, and we're each other's best friends, and we said that we'll grieve together. We won't let the loss of our daughter, like, we won't grieve apart. That won't pull us apart. We committed to each other. The new year, we looked at each other and we kind of said to each other that, or we did say to each other, we're like, we don't like where we're at. Like, physically, mentally, spiritually, we don't like where we're at. We're ready to improve to improve ourselves in all those areas, and so we committed to eating healthier, to a more intense workout regimen, to focusing on more positive things. And once we did that, and when you start to feel a little bit better about yourself, right? Because you have plenty of chances, right, to call it in. You have plenty of chances to to eat poorly, to not work out. And I was making those excuses, and it was making me unhappy, and it was making me unhappier, and it wasn't allowing me to get over our grief, and it wasn't allowing my wife either. And so we said, hey, we're gonna make this commitment together. And then once we did that, things started to change, and we started to have more of a positive mindset. And I'm a person who I like to have goals, and I like to write down my goals, and I like to have a plan. And when I got here on July 10th, I didn't have any goals. I didn't write any goals down for myself. I kind of lost that part of me, right? And on 1 January, I wrote down my goals again. I started to do that, and I started because if you're not looking, if you're just trying to get through the day, I think there's time for that, right? And I wasn't gonna write down a goal on June 7th, right, after the day after losing my daughter, and say, oh, I'm gonna go do this, because it was truly just trying to get through the day for a lot of that. But if you get to the point and you don't ever set goals again, then what am I going to work towards? What am I going to try? And you have to have personal goals. Because you got to have something that you're striving for. Because I think you're always gonna have professional goals, but I think you definitely have to have personal goals that improve yourself. Almost immediately, because I made the decision. That I made the decision again to that I was going to be better, that I was going to start moving forward and start to move forward again, and I'll say, when we talked about, that it's a community and it's a feel, and I was very honest with Colonel Perath and with Colonel Skirmerhorn, and they were very honest with me, saying, hey, you need time, you take time, you just talk to us. And as I was going to mental health and things like that, if it was a bad day at mental health and I was not going to be able to be there mentally and I needed to take the rest of the day off, I talked to Colonel Perath, and he said, go, take that time. And if he didn't give me that kind of support, him and Colonel Skirmerhorn, if they didn't give me that kind of support, it would have been a lot harder, because I would have forced myself into something that I think I just would have kind of just, I don't know, I think I just would have just fallen into a depression, like a deeper depression. But the fact that they were so warm and so caring, and they carried me, they carried a command chief for a good handful of months that probably wasn't meeting their expectations, but they were kind enough not to say it. But they also, I think, understood what we were going through, you know? And um, so when we talked, I think we were talking about the resiliency tactical pause, that like, we can say all these things, but we really show it through our actions. And, you know, Colonel Porath and Colonel Skirmorn, they showed it through their actions, you know, and anybody when I showed up can give me lip service and say, we're here for you, you know, take all the time you want, but they truly showed it through their actions, you know, that they carried me, you know, and I hope I'm paying them back now, I'll say, because I feel like I'm more engaged and I'm more involved, and you know, I still have my good days and bad days, but there are less bad days than there were before, you know. And I think we described it, right? We talked about it last time, Aaron Brooks, that that we're in a box, right?
Yes, sir.
And the grief button's over here, and right after a situation, like your thing that's gonna get you upset, that ball is like continuously touching that, and then over time your ball shrinks, and it's still gonna hit that button every once in a while, and it's gonna bring you back. But it's also going to give you more space and more time where you're not continuously grieving. And so I think that the further you get away, the smaller that ball gets. And the more you do for yourself and the more that you take care of yourself, the smaller that ball gets. But no matter how good you think you're doing, it's still going to hit that grief button every once in a while. And you got to take care of yourself when that happens. And yeah, so there's still good days and bad days. First, communication's the biggest part, and open dialogue of communication, and where if the airman is having it's a bad day, that we give them the space, right? And it may not be a whole day, maybe an hour or two. If we give them, they got to have the space to deal with the emotions that they're going through. Because, you know, I've known for a lot of years that happy, healthy people do a better job, right? And if you force somebody that's not happy or healthy to do the job, you're not going to get peak performance. So we got to help somebody in those situations to work through it, to be able to get them back to where they're happy and healthy. And some of it, and it's not it can't be like, it's not like, okay, I gave you today, now tomorrow you're good and you're good forever. It's continuous, right? And just like I said, the grieving process isn't linear. It doesn't go from this line and finishes here. It goes and comes back, and you kind of keep working through it. And but communication's huge, giving them space, making sure that they have the resources they need. A lot of times it's just, you know, like I've gone to Colonel Porath's office, closed the door, and just talked about what I was going through, and left feeling better, right? And so he never tried to solve my problem. He just heard me out, you know? And that's, I didn't need to go to mental health that day. I talked to Colonel Porath for 15 minutes, and I left, and I felt better. And I think that's huge, is that we got to give people, we got to be so welcoming and so connected that we give them a place where they can come and talk. You know, and I'll be honest, Aaron Brooks, I haven't always been perfect at that. As a senior NCO and NCO in our Air Force, I haven't always been perfect at that. I've had expectations and of airmen, and when they were going through issues, maybe I was thinking about numbers and not the human element. So so I've learned over years to be better at that, and you know, and it's when I have regrets about anything in my Air Force career, it's never about a mission. It's never about an accomplishment. It's never about something that I did or didn't do personally. It's about airmen. You know, thinking back when I could have helped somebody more, or I should have done more for somebody. Those are the regrets, you know, that I have. So we have a lot of expectations of supervisors. And in those expectations, we don't know what that supervisor has gone through in their life, because I think you need to go through hardships in order to have more empathy. And if in your life you haven't really gone through a lot of hardships, then when someone comes to you with a problem that's unfamiliar to you, it's hard for you to have empathy, right? What I think is really good about the Resiliency Tactical Pause is that, you know, we allowed each squadron to determine how they were going to do it. And we didn't say, this is 11th Wing, at one point, at one time, you're all right here, because not everybody fits into the same box. Every work section has its own challenges, you know, has its own interpersonal, you know, dynamic. And if we try to fit everybody into a box, then it is checking the block. You know, we did it to check the block to say we did it. But when we looked at what each unit was doing, it was all about getting together and talking and connecting, right, at a human level, and understanding each other, and what each person is going through, what each struggle that they have. That's how we're really gonna get after suicide. That's how we're really gonna get after, you know, like resiliency as a whole in the Air Force. It's not going to be a big program up here that the Air Force puts out. It's going to be taken care of at the unit level. And when we say airmen, we mean big A airmen, right? Because I'm not immune to it, you know, Colonel Perez not immune to it. We all have struggles. We're all struggling with something. And when we come to that obstacle, whatever that is in our life, in my case, in this situation that we're talking about today, the loss of my daughter, when I come to that obstacle, what am I going to do? Am I going to stop and just stay there? Am I going to go over it? Am I going to go around it? Am I going to go through it? But when I stopped for a while, you know, I stopped at the obstacle. And then I eventually had to go over it to where I'm at on the other side now, right? Too many times, I think we come to that obstacle and we stop and we don't really move on from the obstacle. But we gotta be able to find our way. You can go around it on the side, you can go over it on the top, you can tunnel under it, you can drive through it. But whatever that is, we got to find our way to the other side. And I think too many times we're stopping at it, right? So how do we give people those skills? And those skills are going to come from the support of those around them. You know, a lot of people, that's their family. Other people, they may not have that. So it's going to be the people that they interact with on a daily basis, which are their coworkers. And so how do we help people when they come to that obstacle, whatever that is? Because it's different for everybody else, right? I have my good days and bad days, but there are less bad days now, and I'm happier. I'm happier than I was, you know, this time last year, and I still have my goals, right? I'm still working towards those, and I don't need to give myself a break at work anymore, because I'm able to function almost at the capacity that I want to be at, right? And so that's a good feeling. And you know, last year at this time, I didn't know if I'd ever be where I'm at now, you know. And I think that's because you're just literally just trying to get through the day, you know, and so, but now I can look forward, and you know, I remember my daughter every day. I think about my daughter every day. You know, that Facebook reminder, like that goes back in years. Like almost every day, it's a picture of my daughter, right, with us and the family doing something, and so like those used to crush me, but now I look back or I see those and I smile. Like there was one this morning, and it was just my wife and my daughter. I think at a high school football game or something like that a few years ago, and now it it doesn't hurt, like, and so I think I'm doing better and I'm in a better place. But I'm going to continue to work at it.